Hiya, this is the fourth? Where's the fifth?
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
4. Oh, no.
4.
It is. Is it 4?
I think it's 4.
The latest installment of, I'm covered. The latest installment of Reading with Randos, where we read C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed. And I'm Job, and I'm still starting to appreciate Lewis.
Yep, I'm Tripp.
Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, I'm Tripp. I've been a lifelong Lewis fan, and A Grief Observed is one of my favorite of his stuff. So.
Yes, and I'm Sarah. Grew up on Lewis, especially Narnia and whatnot, but have not read this one previously. So, yeah.
Okay, like each time, I will read the last paragraph that we finished on. It isn't only the boys either. An odd byproduct of my loss is that I'm aware of being an embarrassment to everyone I meet. At work, at the club, in the street, I see people as they approach me trying to make up their minds whether they'll say something about it or not. I hate it if they do, and if they don't, some funk it altogether. R has been avoiding me for a week. I like best the well-brought-up young men, almost boys, who walk up to me as if I were a dentist, turn very red, get it over, and then edge away to the bar as quickly as they decently can. Perhaps the bereaved ought to be isolated in special settlements, like lepers. And the first paragraph of this episode is, to some I'm worse than an embarrassment. I'm a death's head. Whenever I meet a happily married pair, I can feel them both thinking, one or other of us must someday be as he is now. At first, I was very afraid of going to places where H and I had been happy, our favorite pub, our favorite wood. But I decided to do it at once, like sending a pilot up again as soon as possible after he's had a crash. Unexpectedly, it makes no difference. Her absence is no more emphatic in those places than anywhere else. It's not local at all. I suppose that if one were forbidden all salt, one wouldn't notice it much more in any one food than in another. Eating in general would be different every day at every meal. It is like that. The act of living is different all through. Her absence is like the sky spread over everything. Her absence is like the sky spread over everything is such a beautiful sentence, and it so encompasses that it just, it touches everything he does.
Yeah, I don't know. I again, like I've said before, my experience with grief, I mean, obviously I've had them, but it hasn't been to this extent. But I will say that I've felt that way towards others who are going through something really tragic. It's like you don't know how to talk to them or to relate to them. So but I also understand how they are feeling the same way. Like, I mean, I don't know. I've tried to open up dialogue with some, like we have several friends in our church who have been through tragic things, and we actually went through a grief kind of a training class at one point. And so I was like, what do we do as the people who are on the outside? Like, do we ask you how you're doing? Do you want us to keep you accountable? Do you need our input? And mostly what I have heard from them is just being there. And I think he talked about that earlier in the book. It's just sitting, just listening, kind of going about your own life and yet still being present. Or even just a simple, I don't know, just a simple hello and how are you doing? I mean, or I understand, or I see you, or, you know, you're still a person. You're not a leper.
Yeah.
I wonder whether or not that's why sending flowers became a thing for something that happened to people. Something bad happens, and so we send flowers. I almost wonder if that's like a way for us to avoid actually having to, like, we're acknowledging it without having to have that kind of awkward interaction
Awkwardness.
that he's to,
Mhm.
of interaction. Like, I'm sorry. It's easier to write, I'm sorry, our thoughts are with you, or whatever, and a card and send some flowers to someone's house than it is to actually ask about it or like engage with them and be like, hey, I want to know what's going on with you. Like that kind of awkwardness, you can kind of avoid. And then because you have all these other questions, like how close am I to this person really? Like, am
Mhm.
I the kind of person that they want to have this kind of conversation with? Or, you have all these kind of like gray area questions. And I wonder whether or not that's why flowers became a thing. It's a way of acknowledging it without actually having to have that awkward conversation that Lewis is describing.
Mhm. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, even things like I know people in our church and communities have organized meals for people, and that has been something that's meaningful. It's just like you
Oh,
don't feel like cooking or doing those day-to-day things when you just do need to go through those stages of grief. And so they'll have this whole setup where families will bring a meal. I mean the families that have gone through tragic things, I mean, they've had meals for 1, maybe even 2 months after some of those
Mhm.
things taken care of, that they can throw in the freezer and just not have to deal with that. And that, I think, is a really practical, meaningful thing.
Mhm.
That it kind of gets you over that awkwardness too, because you can kind of gauge when you stop by whether they want to have a conversation. You're making yourself available, but you're not. It's like you're there for a purpose, so you can drop it off and leave if you need to. That sort of thing.
that is so nice.
Have you not experienced that?
No. Huh.
Yeah, I
No.
Yeah.
wonder if it's like I wonder if it's like an American church culture thing, but
Yeah, it
we
probably
do it
is.
for we do it
Babies
for
and
yeah, a baby's born, so it's not necessarily a bad thing.
no.
So you do it for a baby's born, or yeah, like an unexpected death or anything else
Mhm.
like that. Then you'd get together with the church and then schedule. Hey, we want 2 weeks worth of meals. Everyone sign up, and you're going to bring it this day, and I'm going to bring it this day, and that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
Oh, that's really great. That's really nice to hear that people do that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, shall we do the next paragraph or
sure.
Yeah.
cool? But no, that is not quite accurate. There is one place where her abscess comes locally home to me, and it is a place I can't avoid. I mean my own body. It had such a different importance while it was the body of H's lover. Now it's like an empty house. But don't let me deceive myself. This body would become important to me again, and pretty quickly, if I thought there was anything wrong with it. So self-aware, and it's also a self-criticism.
Mhm.
Mm.
And yeah, I can just imagine him sitting at his desk writing this, just kind of almost scolding himself for having the thoughts he has in his grief.
Mm.
Yeah, no, self-aware is a good way of putting it. That he like even if he won't let his grief kind of overwhelm how much he knows himself. Um, in that sense, like he's not going to let himself you know go too far down that road that oh, this thing doesn't matter anymore. And he's like, oh no, you know it does, and you know that you will change your mind really soon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's something that yeah, it is weird to think. I mean, a lot of people don't do that, right? A lot of people think, "Oh no, this will never matter again," or "I'll never get over this," and that kind of stuff. And he's like, "No, I will." It's I can't even fool myself even while I'm kind of in the depths of this.
Mhm. Well, and it's just amazing how self-protecting we are. I don't know if either of you have gone through any major health issues. I know, Job, you've had diet stuff and all of
Oh
that,
yeah,
but
doesn't compare.
yeah, but I went through a period where I just had some really unusual symptoms that made me afraid for my life. Like I didn't know what was going on. And it was like I couldn't, it was a similar feeling in what he's describing about it's like not being able to go anywhere or do anything, because it's just this, I think once you have a diagnosis of something, you're able to kind of relax and, okay, we're going to figure out a plan. But it was such a strange period of time, because it was literally chaos, because there were these things happening to me that I had no idea what they were, and I was just frozen. Like I couldn't function during the day. I couldn't feed my kids. I couldn't do anything, because that's all I was thinking about. So that sentence, my body would become important to me again, and pretty quickly, if I thought there was anything wrong with it, I can understand that.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, to Lewis, it seems to at least indicate an awareness of the need for self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, I don't know if this is the case because Lewis was a Christian, but he doesn't seem to entertain the idea of suicide either in his
Mm-hmm.
grief. Which, yeah. So then my question to myself is, would he have if he wasn't a Christian, or is it just not the way he thought? But I don't know. There's no way of knowing that probably.
Yeah, I think Paul tweeted out kind of something that he was thinking about regarding kind of homeless people, or people that are really in bad straits, like financially and that kind of stuff. And so his question was like, why isn't the suicide rate higher than it is for that group of people than the normal population and that kind of stuff? And it's significantly higher. But I think he was asking, well, one could see that it should be even higher, and it's curious a little bit that it's not, if it's just kind of, if we're just looking at from the outside the state of this person's life and that kind of stuff. And so one of his hypotheses was, is it because like you're just so focused on surviving kind of day to day, like my next meal, where am I going to sleep, and all those kind of things, that you don't, this kind of existential dread that drives other types of suicide, you don't really get there, because I'm just worried about where I'm going to sleep tonight, what meal I'm going to have, and that kind of stuff. And so you don't get to some of the existential, what is my life really mean, and that kind of stuff, that I think some other people that struggle with that might question. I don't know. I didn't know what you guys thought about that. I had to look up some statistics after he tweeted that, because I wasn't sure what the actual suicide rate was. But
no, but that I remember Paul van der Kleef saying that, and that was a very interesting thought that hadn't crossed my mind. Another thing that just popped into my head is that Age died of cancer, and she was basically taken away. And then it's also kind of an insult to her to then take your own life. Whether you think that is something that is, whether you think suicide is permissible, than to say, well, you might as well keep living because the other person didn't get to. So I hadn't thought of that before. We can go to the next one, I guess.
Okay.
Sure.
Cancer and cancer and cancer. My mother, my father, my wife. I wonder who is next in the queue. Yet Age herself, dying of it, and well knowing the fact, said that she had lost a great deal of her old horror at it. When the reality came, the name and the idea were in some degree disarmed. And up to a point, I very nearly understood. This is important. One never meets just cancer or war or unhappiness or happiness. One only meets each hour or moment that comes. All manner of ups and downs. Many bad spots in our best times, many good ones in our worst. One never gets the total impact of what we call the thing itself. But we call it wrongly. The thing itself is simply all these ups and downs. The rest is a name or an idea. It seems sort of stoic almost.
Yeah, it does have kind of a stoic or like a Buddhist like tinge to it, right?
Yeah, and it kind of makes me think of Peterson's Rule 12. Like you just meet the each hour or moment that comes, and you try to deal with that. But you never meet the thing, the cancer, the experience. I mean, you have cancer at a moment. I don't know. I mean, personally, I
Yeah.
haven't had that sort of hardship. So
Hmm. Yeah, it just seems like he's saying it's one of those things. It's just these things happen, and it's one of the bad, you know. It's almost like, I don't know, like if you could interact with cancer, um, as a person or as a persona, it might be easier to understand the meaning of it or something. And instead, it's always filtered through, um, you know, just something that happens to us. I don't know.
yeah, it's always the experience of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how age lost a great deal of her old horror at it, if that was just being dulled by the experience. Like eventually it's just, yeah, I have cancer, this is the new state of being, and I don't know how I would deal with it, if I would be able to stoically resign myself to it. I guess I'd find out.
Yeah, I feel like I have more trouble seeing someone go through it than going through it myself. I think that I could see how someone could reach that point where you kind of made peace with it. You know, at this point you fought against it so long, right? And there's a certain exhaustion and that kind of stuff, you know, that goes along with it. And then at some point you kind of like resign yourself, okay, this is gonna happen. And you can see how you're like, okay, there's a certain relief, I feel like, in just kind of giving up the struggle against something else, even if that thing is still going to end up winning. You're just like, okay, I'm not going to let this like be the totality of my existence, or take all of my mental energy and that kind of stuff in a way that where you were hoping you were going to beat it might, right? You still have that hope. And so it takes so much of your energy and your thoughts and that kind of stuff. Like, how am I going to do this? When am I going to know? All those kind of things. And there's probably like a certain relief in just saying, okay, that's, you know, it's not good news, but at least like, you know. So it's like, you know, Sarah saying, like, just having the diagnosis, like knowing what's going on and that kind of stuff. There's a certain amount, even though it may not be good news, the diagnosis, like there's a certain amount of relief of just like knowing what's going to happen. Even if you don't really like what you found out.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard of people, even after having surgery, having cancerous tumors removed, that they've actually wanted the tumor to keep it, so they can like see it as this physical thing. It's like I mean, it reminds me of just like you're meeting the cancer. It's like, okay,
right,
here we are.
Yeah.
who's gonna win here? And you know, and then if the cancer does, then it's like, all right. I come from, my background is tainted with a lot of like healing, prosperity, word of faith type stuff. So a lot of my childhood was spent with the attitude that you know, the churches I was in at that stage, it was like, if something is happening to you, it's because, you know, you don't have enough faith, you're saying the wrong words, like you're speaking this thing into existence almost. And that if, you know, if everything was God's will, was God's perfect will, this wouldn't be happening to you, that sort of thing. And then I actually kind of, I thought that part of my past was behind me, but then it ended up being a kind of a big issue in our church a couple of years ago as well. And so at that point, I really dug into, what do I think about like healing? Do I believe that this is something that still happens? Do I think that, you know, it's all in our minds, and you know, should we just have this sort of stoicism, like face things that come, and, you know, try and make it through the best we can. And through that process, I came across this message by this Orthodox priest out in California. His name is Father Josiah Trenum, and he was talking about the sacrament of healing in the Orthodox Church. And I don't know what it's like in other traditions. I haven't explored that thoroughly, but he was saying how they have this service of a sacrament of healing, and as you're coming into this you know, to be prayed for, it's like you're not necessarily expecting the cancer to go away, but it's this dedication of the cancer to Christ. So in essence, you're uniting whatever is ailing your body with Christ's suffering. So it's like you're transforming whatever the suffering is into something that can be useful and positive. And to me, that was so powerful, because it almost makes it like, you know, whatever happens, we still can win. It's like, you know, the beauty that I've seen come through people's sufferings that I feel like have done that very thing has been so impactful to me. So I just think, if that is the case, and something tragic happens to me, if I get cancer, if a child dies or whatnot, to have that, I'm uniting this with Christ's suffering. He has, you know, he's experienced the depth and breadth of anything that I could ever experience, and his suffering was transformed into glory. My suffering can be transformed into glory as well, and it can start right now. It's not like in some future life. It can start immediately here. So I don't know what y'all think about that, but.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that particular sacrament in the Orthodox Church. I wonder. Yeah, it's not a Catholic sacrament. Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that. I like that idea. To be honest, I didn't. Yeah, I grew up, you know, kind of conservative Presbyterian, so we didn't have the healing stuff and that kind of thing. Like, you pray, like it's weird, because you would pray for someone who was sick and you would hope for a miracle and that kind of stuff, but it wasn't like if it doesn't happen, it's because of the lack of faith of the people experiencing suffering, or like, we didn't have that kind of charismatic bent to it. So I never really had that hang up. It's more like, pray and maybe God will do something, but it's not guaranteed, and it certainly doesn't necessarily have to do with you really just not believing enough. That's my wife kind of grew up like in a charismatic background, and so she had some of that and the speaking in tongues and that kind of thing, but it was very different for me. So that's interesting. I'll read more about you said what was the priest's name? Father
Josiah Trenum.
Josiah Trenum. Okay. I'll look that up. That's interesting. Yeah. I like that.
I mean, I can send you the YouTube link that I found of that talk. I thought it was really, it's like, I mean, I've struggled with when to ask for prayer, or even feeling like I should ask for prayer. It's like, well, things are going to happen the way that they are. Why? Like, what's the point? What's the point of it? And that, I don't know, like, so that perspective, it's like, okay, so it doesn't really matter the circumstances. Whatever comes at me, they can be transformed in a very proactive and tangible way. So it's like, it's still something is happening, whether or not the physical healing occurs now or not. It's doing something. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you see this with Jesus, though. Even when he's praying, you know, he's asking for something, but then he's also saying, but, you know, if not, thy will be done, kind of thing. So, like, I think that we're still called to pray and ask for what it is that we want, and that kind of stuff, but then also to resign ourselves that ultimately that may not be God's will. And the more important thing is to submit to God's will. So you see, you know, Jesus in Gethsemane, right? You know, if possible, let this cup pass from me, but if not, your will be done, right? In the Lord's Prayer, you see very similar things. But so I still think that we should ask for it, but then also I like the idea of kind of it being a sacrament to say, okay, but if not, I'm still going to make this thing holy. This still is going to be a redeemed thing, and I'm not gonna count it an unanswered prayer or a loss if it doesn't get answered in the way that I want it to.
Right. And that's the thing, the way that you want it to. Maybe your prayer is answered, it just happens in a different
Right.
way.
Yeah. Job, any thoughts?
Debating myself whether I should engage. I always get kind
do
of
it.
nervous when things like prayer and disease are mentioned in the same sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I understand that as well. Like it's
so I got the impression from how you described the sacrament in the Orthodox Church that, oh God, I'm going to get in so much trouble. It seemed fairly pragmatic.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain degree, for sure.
I mean, it's you hinted at it, Tripp, because there is this idea of, if you just pray hard enough, and like pray harder, Simba, maybe then your dad will get up again, just pray harder. And that's I have words and thoughts about that. In my church, you can ask for a prayer, and then it gets included in the final prayer that the pastor performs before we get the blessing. I think that's a fine approach. And yeah, Sarah, I get what you're saying about, well, should you pray because things are going to happen as they do? Yeah, that kind of hints at determinism, right?
Yeah, and
I mean, thing.
I don't really, I don't really know what I think about all of that. I don't know that I ever will, as far as like, I've come to the consensus that it's both, it's God knows, and we have free will. Somehow that works out.
Yeah, I mean, you see both of those in the scriptures too, right?
Yeah.
People ask for prayers and God changed his mind, right? It says that, but
right.
then it also says things like, "Don't fool yourself. I, God, do not change," kind of thing. And so, yes, we have a hard time describing God because it's a fundamentally different kind of thing than we are. And so, yes, I'm going to go with both. God doesn't change his mind, and yet God does change his mind. So I'm fine with that. I'm large; I contain multitudes. It's fine.
Yeah, I had that same problem with, because it then quickly turns into the well, you can pray and maybe then the cancer will go away. Well, how did the cancer get there? I mean, it's just such a, who did that? And that turns to all these.
Well, I mean, but that's the thing, and this is one of the. This is something that came up with my chat with Paul. Is Paul used the example of Lazarus dying, and he talks about how Jesus kind of set that up, because like they were asking Jesus, "Come, hurry, he's sick," all this kind of stuff, and he just like takes his sweet time getting there. And this is Jesus, like he knows what's gonna happen. He kind of did the whole thing, and then he's like, now he's sad, and then he, raised from the dead and everything else like that. And so you're like, well, what, dude? Like, yeah, who put the cancer there? Who put the cancer there? Yeah, maybe the same God that's gonna take it away once you ask for it, or not. And maybe that's just his will too. You don't get to choose. God's not as. I think that's one of those things, is that the charismatic, like if you prayed hard enough, if the perfect will of God happened, then you wouldn't have cancer and that kind of stuff. And I don't know. I read the Bible and I'm like, I don't get that impression, actually. I have a hard time squaring that both with my own life and then also reading the Bible.
Yeah.
Not a cute, fuzzy lion. Not at all. No.
No, he's he's Aslan, right? That's one of the things that Aslan the lion, he goes and, I forget who was it in the story that wanted to take a drink from the pool. And he wanted kind of an assurance that Aslan, he or she, I can't remember which character it was, but wanted assurance that Aslan was safe and wasn't going to attack and that kind of stuff. And Aslan's like, no, you can drink if you want to. but I'm not giving you any guarantees. That he's not a cute fuzzy lion. It's that kind of a lion. That one's that's both good and dangerous. And so that's not a comfortable place for us to be.
I think Mr. or Mrs. Beaver that tells, was it Lucy? She asked if he's a safe lion in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Right. Yeah.
Safe? Heavens no. But he's good.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Since this episode was kind of on cancer, it reminded me of somebody who is no longer with us. Peter Hitchens, who's a Belgian computer programmer. He made a 0MQ, the messaging library, and he had survived cancer before and he came back, I believe. And they couldn't fix it. Well, well, you know what I mean. And he said, "Don't tell me that I'm fighting. Don't tell me that I shouldn't give up. Excuse me. That's pointless. That there is no such thing as fighting or giving up in this thing. You're just doing what you can." And he approached it fairly stoically. He made sure all the things for his kids were in order. He threw a huge party where basically everybody was invited. And he says, whether I'm still alive by then, we're still going to have the party, even if I'm dead. And there was a huge party and people brought things. And at some point he said goodbye. He said, I have no regrets. And since he was in Belgium, he could be euthanized. So eventually he decided to end it. And well, you can disagree whether he should have, but I could empathize with the way that he said, don't treat this as something that I can just fight harder, because it's not. It's this process, this malignant growth, and well, we're going to do what we can.
And sometimes trying to fight those things so viciously, you end up losing your quality of life. And I mean, for me, it's like I'd rather have a shorter life and be able to enjoy it more than just be miserable and stuck in a hospital trying to fight something like that. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Being Mortal, which is a fantastic book. It's all about death and dying and the end of life, which sounds incredibly morbid, but it's actually a very thoughtful philosophical approach to how to deal with the end when it comes. And it talks a lot about elderly, but the man who wrote it, what is his name? Gawande is his last name. He's an Indian physician, and he has his roots in a more traditional background and how they deal with elderly versus like the nursing home situation, or I don't know, but I just think of people in stages of life, and it's gross. Like no one wants to be around people who are in a nursing home or, at the end of their life. And so he talks through just what it all means and what's worth it, like what you should actually try to do. And it's written in a story form. It's a really amazing book if you're interested in that sort of thing.
Being Mortal?
Being Mortal. Mm-hmm. It's a really easy read. I listened to it on Audible. He has a fantastic way with words.
Is it religious?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'm sort of reminded now. I'm just thinking of people. My wife's father died of lung cancer. Way back when, 1997. She lost both her parents at a pretty young age, and her father died over the span of years, and so they would eventually he had only like this tiny part of lung left. They had taken everything else out, but they couldn't stop the cancer. And at some point, you're just slowly suffocating, and he got morphine because that makes it easier to breathe. And at some point, he could hardly just still breathe. And doctor winked at him and said, well, here's your morphine pump. You can give as much as you need to breathe to yourself. I've taken off the limit, and there you go. And then he kind of just could control his own passing by not having to eventually suffocate to death. And yeah, and then whenever I hear what do you call those arguments that against euthanasia, and I don't want to turn this into a debate of euthanasia, but then I always have to think of that because, well, choking to death, or because that's inevitable with having this tiny amount of lung left that maybe will last another week, or kind of having the own control of how you'll go through drifting away on morphine overdose. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's hard to be.
Sorry, I was just going to say he addresses that really well in the book, and I think this Atul Gawande is his name in Being Mortal, and he doesn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but he talks about, basically he says it shouldn't be the rule, but there should be exceptions, and I think I kind of would agree with that. I don't know.
It's hard because our kind of medicine and our capabilities have gotten good enough that we can keep people alive that maybe we shouldn't have. Maybe we should, like, and not to like sound like, you know, harsh about it, but like maybe we're not doing anyone any favors. We're introducing like an artificial life to someone that's full of pain and suffering and all this kind of stuff with no hope of a recovery. Whereas even decades ago, you know, even like 50 years ago, that wouldn't have even been an option. They would have just passed away before they even got to this point. And so I think in addition to having the euthanasia conversation, like we should have, I think, a broader conversation about just how we administer medicine in general. And you know, are we really just introducing pain into people's lives and that kind of stuff, or should we? Are we like in denial about being mortal, I guess is my question. And we're just like, medicine's going to keep me alive forever. And so we're going to keep doing everything I can to stay. But then we end up getting someone to an end of a line that they don't want to live anymore, actually.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think that was my thought. It's like, it's hard for me to draw a hard line, whereas I think maybe it was a little bit easier and past you know, centuries maybe, where it was more like suicide than euthanasia, because we are introducing something into the mix that wasn't there before. And I think we have to have a conversation just about that. I don't have like a hard and fast rule about it, but I do. Yeah.
The modern science part is interesting because, well, we extend lives, but we also, I mean, without that same modern science, I wouldn't have lived. Like I was totally not viable.
Exactly.
So
correct. Yes. No. I think that there are pros and cons to it. I'm not saying it's fully bad and that kind of stuff. I just think that we're not nearly as judicious about it, and I think that making a blanket like do everything you can to survive is probably not as long as possible. And that kind of stuff is probably not the right. Probably not the right attitude. Like, I still eat bacon, and maybe it shaves like a couple months off my life, but I'm cool with it. But then I think the cons to each, and I don't think we can make a blanket rule about it. I think we need to be more thoughtful.
Well, again,
than that.
I'll plug the book one more time because those topics are addressed very well.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm gonna read it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, we can try another one. We got about 20 minutes left.
Okay.
It is incredible how much happiness, even how much gaiety, we sometimes had together after all hope was gone. How long, how tranquilly, how nourishingly we talked together that last night. And yet, not quite together. There's a limit to the one flesh. You can't really share someone else's weakness or fear or pain. What you feel may be bad. It might conceivably be as bad as what the other felt, though I should distrust anyone who claimed that it was. But it would still be quite different. When I speak of fear, I mean the merely animal fear, the recoil of the organism from its destruction, the smothery feeling the sense of being a rat in a trap. It can't be transferred. The mind can sympathize, the body less. In one way, the bodies of lovers can do it least. All their love passages have trained them to have not identical, but complementary, correlative, even opposite feelings about one another. I sometimes totally butcher words. It's a difficult paragraph.
Yeah.
I don't even have any notes because I probably couldn't think of any.
I like this. I do like the sentence, the mind can sympathize, the body less. I think that we at least in kind of my tradition, we overemphasize the like mental aspects of our faith, like the rules, the theology, like the, you know, those kind of things and whatever. And we underemphasize some of like the sacraments, like the physical things that we do. And I think that's to our detriment. And that's one thing that I do like about like the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church and that kind of thing, is that there is more like a physical participation, not just a mental belief structure, but a physical participation in the thing that we're doing. And that's what's important about communion and everything else. And so I think it's a deep recognition that like, yeah, you understand things better when you act them out, when there's some kind of bodily experience that you're having and not just a thought. And so when I said the mind can, that's right, like, but it's more intellectual. It's more like, I know this person's in pain, I feel bad about it, but experiencing it like physically, that physical pain of having cancer, being sick and that kind of stuff. I can feel bad when my wife has a cold, but it's very different than what I feel like when I have a cold. And same thing with this. Like I like that. I like that sentence because it's a deep recognition that we're not just brains, kind of puppets over our bodies. Like the body itself can't empathize the same way that your mind might be able to. So that's what I thought about in that paragraph.
It's interesting when he's talking about, he says the bodies of lovers can do at least. Well, this is just a superficial thing, but I probably have the hardest time sympathizing with my husband when he's sick. And I wonder if that, extends into like he's saying, extends into something that is even, more tragic and serious. I don't know. I've never thought about it in that way before, but I have to really work at sympathizing with my husband. It's more like, okay, let's get over this, let's move on.
That's so funny. That's so funny. My wife and I have the exact same relationship when I get sick, is that she does not care, and I'm the worst sick person in the history of the world. I'm a 3-year-old, and I can do nothing for myself.
I think it may be a male trait.
Yep, I get man sick for sure. Yeah.
I really appreciate my wife all of a sudden. What do you folks? Yeah.
Maybe it's an American thing. I don't know. No, I was saying maybe it's an American thing. I don't know.
So your wife takes care of you, Joe?
Oh, I don't tend to get sick very often, but she's usually just surprised when I do, because I don't tend to. But I can just imagine you, Sarah, yelling at your husband for blowing his nose a couple of times. Like, stop sniffling.
My wife has definitely woken up in the morning, and she's like, "Oh, I slept terribly. You were sniffling and blowing your nose all night." And I was like, "Yeah, I was there. I'm aware."
Yeah, stop suffering already.
Yeah. I feel like that would change if it was something serious, though. I don't think I'm completely heartless.
Walk off the cancer.
Yeah.
Take some Robitussin. Yeah.
Rub some dirt on it. It'll be fine.
Oh, okay. Now we're talking about grief and we're just laughing. We can do one more, and then maybe that's the last one. We've gone through quite a couple. Usually it's only 3. We both knew this. I had my miseries. I had my miseries, not hers. She had hers, not mine. The end of hers would be the coming of age of mine. We were setting out on different roads. This cold truth, this terrible traffic regulation. You, madam, to the right. You, sir, to the left. Is just the beginning of the separation, which is death itself. It's just great divorce.
This reminds me of a time. I think I was pregnant with our second child, and there was a lady in our church who was around the same. She was pregnant with a baby. It was the same stage, stage of development, but they found out at 20 weeks that their baby was not going to survive. So I can very much understand this feeling of like we're both people, we're both expecting a child, and yet her path was so completely different from mine. It was really difficult to try and to even see her, talk to her, and I would wonder like what she was thinking about seeing me. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a drastic difference with such a similar something that's happening to you.
Yeah, you're powerless to stop it.
That is one of the weird things about a spouse dying, I think, is that especially one that's been suffering and that kind of stuff. So he says the end of her miseries would be the coming of age of mine. That her problems ending, tonight. She's gonna pass away, and so the thing that's making her, all the bad things in her life are going to go away. And if you're a Christian, you believe in the resurrection, everything else like that. She's going to be like more alive than she's ever been after this, in some sense. But Lewis is going to go on with added miseries that he didn't have before, with having to deal with living without her. So he has all the miseries that he had before in his just regular life, but now he's got a dead spouse on top of it. And she's not even going to be there to be able to kind of, because by the nature, she's not going to be there to help him through it, right? Unlike all of his other miseries. And so he's going to have to go this particular one alone.
Oh, yeah.
And so I do think that is an interesting to think about. I think it's one of the reasons, I don't want to get a discussion about it, but Mark Driscoll always used to say that like he hopes that it's a weird thing to say. He hopes that his wife dies first so that like he's the one that goes through that instead of her. And I always thought that was bizarre, a bizarre thing to say. But reading through Lewis, I think that like there is a
sorry, I got it. Oh boy.
Is it a fire?
Fire?
Yeah. Well, it's okay. Oh, it's a totally different town. Why am I getting paid for this? It's priority 2, so I can let this one go. We have plenty of people on standby. All right. So,
all right.
Oof, I was not expecting that. Okay, where were we?
Oh no, I was just kind of the end of my thought that I always thought that Driscoll's like his statement there was I always thought it bizarre, but I think I understand it a little bit now reading Lewis's paragraph there, that what he's saying is I've got a bunch of miseries now that are on my shoulders that she's not going to be able to help me with. And that's an interesting thing about the spousal relationship.
And it's amazing how we could still be feeling sorry for ourselves when we're our loved one is the one that's about to die, and yet we're thinking about ourselves and the grief that we're going to have to go through afterwards. It's just interesting. I mean, it's not like it's insignificant, it is, but I don't know. I think in a terminal situation like that, once you've just come to peace with the fact that you're going to go, I imagine it is harder for the person staying, for the person still living, for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, my brain's a bit frazzled right now. The jolt of adrenaline. I don't understand. Oh, I know what this. Oh, okay. Yeah, I might want to cut this one short because this is the air measurement, the specialty that I'm a part of. So I'm going to check if they need me. We're kind of out of time.
Okay.
Well,
No worries.
that's a good spot to end it, I think.
Yep, I think so.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, see ya.